Well, hey there, folks. How is it going? Welcome to the Opening Minds channel. Thanks for being here tonight. We've got Vet here, short order cook, and Jules, and Gary. Thanks, everyone. Shambhala. Thanks. I really felt compelled to do this today live. I haven't done a live presentation in a while, but I woke up this morning and, like many of you, we had this press briefing from the House Oversight Committee. Did you guys get a chance to listen to that? I really thought it was quite amazing, and I just wanted to talk about it for a few minutes, having been involved in this subject area for a number of years. Because often when I do radio interviews and things, you get this sort of question, this sort of cynical, sort of negative attitude that anything can change, right? And you're all aware of this. Like, nothing's ever going to happen. Like, it's just always going to be like this. We'll never know the truth about UFOs, UAP, and all of this, right? And I was there in, Central Europe in '89. As Julie said, it was all sorts of enthusiasm. I was there in 1989 in, working at this research institute, this joint. Whoops, we got some squeaky toys here. We got some squeaky toys here with the dog. Sorry. Hey, give me that toy. You give me that. I was there in Austria in '89, just before the Berlin Wall came down, and it was starting to come down in that summer of 1989. And I worked with East Germans at this institute. It was this joint East-West institute that had been set up by Nixon and Brezhnev to create some cooperation between the Soviet Union and the United States. And nobody saw this coming. There were a lot of West Germans over in there were a lot of East Germans in the West German embassy. Hungary had taken down its iron wall, its iron curtain, its barbed wire. They said, we're not going to do this anymore. And they just took all the barbed wire away. They were part of the East Bloc, and they said, we're not enforcing it. And a lot of East Germans left and went to the West German embassy. And I went over there, and there were crowds of West Germans. And they said, we're not going home. And that's what started the whole thing. Yes, you got that squeaky toy, little kid. So I know that things can change. And you've heard me say this. I'm not going to go over this again. But things can change faster than you can expect, guys. It really can. I know if you've seen decades of the same old, that you think it's just always going to be like that. But one day it just changes. And it did for East Germans. And those East Germans that I knew at the IASA Institute in Schloss Laxenburg, this castle there where they had this institute. They didn't expect things to change. They were telling me how life was fine in East Germany. If you were good with the Communist Party, if you're good with the higher ups, you were fine. But it wasn't fine. And within 5 months, they had probably all lost their jobs, and East Germany ceased to exist in December of '89. So anyway, I've seen things change. And when I got up this morning, and I saw Tim Burchett there, and Representative Luna from the Congressman from Florida, these people seemed really ticked off. Didn't you get that feeling? They have been listening to briefings, as Science Bob has been telling us, Bob McGuire, for a while. He said they've been hearing briefings for 2 years now. And they've probably heard a lot, because if Congress has heard anything that I've heard over my years of going to conferences and meeting witnesses and people who want to tell their stories, people who've been in the government or, aerospace, if they've heard what I've heard, they've got to be wondering what the F is going on, in this situation that we're in. What are we not being told? And And yeah, as Jules says, it's better than this old swamp gas explanation, or flocks of geese, or ice crystals, or pilot fatigue. And, you know, if you've been following my channel, anyone's channel on YouTube since it started, I don't know, it was like 2007 or so, we can all get access to this sort of information. You'll know that something is up. And there's things going on Earth, and witnesses, good quality, high caliber witnesses, who maybe they can tell their stories, maybe they can't tell their stories, or maybe they tell you at a conference. Even Stephen Greer said this once. How come you go to dinner parties and you hear all these inside information and it doesn't make its way to Congress? Well, I think it's making its way to Congress right now. And you could tell from the attitude. Now, if you listen to this conference this morning, which, you know, it was a buzz on Twitter, I listened to, it was really interesting. You had Tim Burchett, that they're not putting up with this BS anymore of not being told the truth about what this is. They want to know, is this our stuff, or is it extraterrestrial or someone else's technology? And stop beating around the bush. Now, this was what I thought was fantastic. And I agree with you, Julie. Gary, I think you're being too pessimistic. I don't blame you, but things do change. We don't believe we're at the center of the universe anymore like we did 500 years ago. Things really do change sometimes. You cannot stop the truth from eventually getting out. There's too many witnesses. So I thought, that's just my point of view on it. I mean, you can have different points of view. I'm just telling you, things can change, and they can change faster than you would expect. No one expected the Soviet Union to completely collapse in 1991, 2 years after the Berlin Wall came down. But that's exactly what happened. And things rise and things fall, and it can happen here too. So I was really interested in this story of Tim Burchett and Representative Luna from Florida said that they had got the tip-off from some witnesses. It was at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. Eglin. They went down there. They said, hey, we're Congress. We want to know if you guys have UFO parts down here or something like that. They didn't tell us exactly what the tip-off was, but they went down there, right? And they said they were given this briefing, which they felt like they had to stop in the middle because it was so boring and bland and not related to what they were interested in. They were on a fact-finding mission, and they were being given the same old by the Air Force, which, whatever it was, they said they stopped it in the middle. And they said, okay, this isn't what we came here for. I mean, these are our Congress people. And then they said they got into, no, Gary, I totally get it. I mean, Gary, you are the pro here. You have 50 years of experience. You knew art. I totally get this. I respect your point of view. But let's just keep an open mind. Can we agree to that, Gary? We'll keep an open mind, and let's just see what happens. I think you have to agree, Gary, that every 100 years ago paradigms changed. Things happen. But anyway, thanks for being here. And for those of you who don't know Gary is a great radio show host, and he was on my YouTube channel not too long ago with his Bigfoot story that, thank you, Gary, for coming forward with that he said he had not told on the radio before. You have to listen to this. So Gary knows his stuff. But in any case, we will just see. I mean, it could go many different directions. But weren't you fascinated that they argued with the base general there, the general, and said, oh, we're not going to give you this information? And they got an argument with him, and they got ticked off. And you could see they were ticked off this morning, and they were like, they were putting our foot down. And as Rob Heatherly pointed out this morning on Twitter, the Department of Defense, DOD, is not a fourth branch of government. There's only three branches of government. So DOD is accountable to these three branches of government. And they have to answer up. And Congress feels like it's been getting stonewalled. And I think the other representatives at this press conference this morning, they were saying the same thing. You even had that guy who said he's a former computer data analyst. He said, I'm skeptical, but still, what's the problem here? why are we always getting stonewalled when we want to find out what's going on with this particular topic? I think you have to agree that it's a good question, and they want to know if there's nothing here, why can't we get answers to our questions? Why, when we get to this topic, are we stonewalled? We're told you can't go into this section of the base, or as Luna and Burchett found out, we're not going to tell you anything. And it was just like that meeting that we had last May in the Senate, I believe, where it was bureaucrats from the Pentagon, and as Zabel and Coolhart pointed out on their really good YouTube podcast, Need to Know, the only two words we heard there are, it's classified, or I don't know. That was the only two responses. So that was not very encouraging, but we're going to get 3 credible witnesses on July 26th, Wednesday, we're told. David Grush, who we've all heard of by now, who has been saying the UFO crash retrieval programs are real, and he's heard about it firsthand from witnesses. He had access to 2,000 special access programs, worked in NRO and NGAO, high-level satellite organizations within the U.S. government, and David Fravor and Ryan Graves, the Navy pilots who've encountered these objects. So this is what it reminded me of. I wanted to show you a few pictures from none other than the citizen hearing. The citizen hearing was this event that took place in 2013 at the National Press Club, right? And there were 5 days of testimony, over 40 witnesses, and there were these night presentations by various ufologists, Gary Heseltine, the police investigator from Great Britain, Richard Dolan, and several others. And it was a fascinating event. You can see Stanton Friedman in the background. You had these panels, and you had these retired Congress people. This was sponsored by Steve Bassett and the Paradigm Research Group. Now, we're at the National Press Club. These were all retired congressmen and a senator, Senator Gravel from Alaska, right? And you can see Danny Sheehan at the very end there of the table with the white hair. He was, sort of the attorney representative. And they were retired because Steve Bassett said they couldn't get any sitting Congress people to attend because everyone thought it would be bad for their career to be involved with UFOs. They couldn't get anybody, so they paid these representatives $20,000 for 5 days, which is sort of reasonable for people in their position. And they listened to this testimony from different panels. And it was really interesting to hear this in the National Press Club. Now, C-SPAN has automated cameras there, and they didn't even turn their cameras on. They could have turned them on for 15 minutes. It's not like you had kindergartners there testifying. Danny's hair has been all white, Jules, ever since I saw him at the International UFO Congress in 2000 when I first started going to UFO conferences. But really, really smart guy, worked in the Carter administration, as you know. And he got access to the classified section of the Library of Congress, and saw what he thought was clear evidence of downed UFOs in the classified section. Remember his story that you're not allowed to take photographs in the classified section of Library of Congress, but he sketched something on a piece of paper and folded it in a pad, and when they checked, they didn't see anything. So he took out this sketch of what he believed was a downed vehicle, and he's been involved ever since. His story is very interesting. But in this citizen hearing, I went because it was open to everyone. you could just go and sit there at the National Press Club. There was no fee, but it's expensive to stay in Washington, D.C. for 6-7 days. And I'd come down with my partner from New York City, and Susan and I ran into none other than Bob Wood at Penn Station. Now, Robert Wood worked for McDonnell Douglas, and he was at the first Congressional UFO hearing, a one-day event in 1968. You remember that one? I forget who else is there. Probably some of you know. And he testified how McDonnell Douglas. We'll get to that in a second, Gary. It's good. It's reasonable point. He testified that McDonnell Douglas had a reverse engineering program for UFOs back in 1968. That he knew this was real because McDonnell Douglas wanted to figure out how these things work. So Bob Wood and his wife said, well, you can say you're our guests. And that's how we got into all of the lunches and everything, which was a lot of fun. So this citizen hearing, I found it to be a very interesting event. I got to talk to Merrell Cook. Now, Merrell Cook was a retired congressperson from Salt Lake City District in Utah. He was a very open-minded guy. He said he came there with no expectations one way or another, and he was convinced that this was real by the end of the 5 days. I mean, we heard from people from FAA, John Callahan. There were these different panels, a Roswell group, the Missile Control Launch Officers Group, Bob Salas, Dave Shindelli, and others, which we'll talk about in a second. And Merrell had an open mind, and he listened. And I called him up after the citizen hearing because I got to have lunch with him, and I asked him, and he gave me his. He said to contact him, so I looked him up online, and I called the number on the internet, and he picked it up. A couple weeks later, I said, "What did you really think about all this?" He says, "I think it's a serious issue because it's a flight safety issue at a minimum." And we heard of this sort of issue from civilian pilots and so forth. Now, when I talked to Steve Bassett at the citizen hearing, he said, I said, this is a great event. And he goes, no, don't thank me yet. You'll thank me when there's a line of media cars outside the National Press Club. Then we know it. And it never happened. I sat next to a reporter from the New York Times. Okay? There were a lot of reporters there, Washington Post, New York Times, a couple other newspapers. And this reporter said to me, I said, what do you think, right? We're hearing all this testimony from, all sorts of folks. There were military representatives from South American militaries. I got to have lunch with a military official from Uruguay. There were military officials from Brazil and Chile. Dr. Roger Lear was there talking about Virginia. There's the movie out from James Fox about that, and implants, and all sorts of folks. So I asked this New York Times reporter, yes, archaic revival, this is what former senators and Congress people get for 5 days of their time. It's just what the pay grade is for if you've been in Congress. This is sort of what you get paid. It's just the reality. I mean, you got to pay them something for sitting there. It's a reasonable amount for really a whole week of their time. But in any case, and I thought they did a good job. But this is what the going rate is for hiring Congress people for that time. Was it $4,000 a day or something? It's just what you get after you've been in Congress. In any case, I asked this New York Times reporter, and he said, this is the best. Happy to, Gary, anytime. The New York Times reporter said, this is the best information I've ever heard. I can't get them to send anyone down from New York City to cover it. Hello? I need a cameraman and an audio person to cover this story properly, and they won't send anyone. And here you have all these esteemed people and really solid witnesses. I mean, missile control launch officers, these are the people that press the button, and they're telling you We'll get to a story about that in a second. So when this was all said and done, I read some of the articles that came out in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and most of these were pretty snarky, arrogant articles where they really made fun of this and talked about why do old military men believe in little green aliens and all. They didn't take it seriously, and I thought this is was a pretty superficial way, glib. Isn't that what the word? It's glib. I mean, if you don't believe former military pilots, FAA officials, people who've served in the Air Force, I mean, who do you believe? What does it need to take? So we're going through this, guys, right now because we're not getting a lot of media response. Maybe we will after Wednesday, but you've not really seen very much in any of these mainstream papers. I had my own New York Times story. I ran into someone who worked in the PR business when I lived in Manhattan between 2010 and 2020. I was there part of the time. I had an office on 24th Street and 6th Avenue in Chelsea, a shared office space. And just happened to run into someone from the PR business. He goes, I love your topic. I love this topic. Would you like us to represent you? You know, UFOs and these sorts of related phenomena. I thought, well, sure. I mean, we're in New York City. It'd be fun to do some media events. So he finally books a gig for me with the New York Times business section about my crop circle tours. And I do a story for the woman that writes the travel column. And it's about to come out. And I read it. I have it somewhere. It was really good. And I mentioned UFOs in there in passing. And the night before the story is supposed to come out, I get a call from Harry at the PR company. He goes, I got a call from the New York Times. They're not running your story. I said, why? He said, everyone thought it was great. I mean, you're talking about crop circles. You have people that come on the tour. It's like niche travel. And you have these related topics, UFOs, and it's all fascinating. Orbs. The editor for the business section of the New York Times said, I didn't like it. And that's the end of your story. So that was my experience with the New York Times. Go figure. Whatever. They didn't like it, but maybe they'll like it now, guys, because this is a really serious issue, as you know. Now, let's take a look at why it's so serious. And we're not going to be here forever. This is not going to go on very long tonight. But I just want to talk about this because I think this is really important. We had David Shindelli. David Shindelli, a missile control launch officer at Minot Air Force Base in 1967. He says that he was contacted by Robert Salas. And Salas, you know, wrote that book, Faded Giant, and a couple other books about his experience at Maelstrom Air Force Base in Montana in 1967, March, when flights of missiles went down simultaneously and some objects came over the missile control launch facility. And he had come forward about it, but Shindelli had been told, this never happened. I don't have the book here. He wrote a book. You can probably still find it around. It never happened. He goes in. He told us. He went in to the launch control, the base that day, before deploying to his launch control facility. And he's told all the missiles went down. And now he had heard reports of UFOs on the news that morning. And he's told, and he said they were very proud of their record at Minot in his launch control facility, like 99% uptime, which affects your rank and everything. What the uptime of the missiles, the Minuteman missiles. And they tell him, your missiles went down, you won't talk about it. They're all down. There were some lights seen. You won't talk about it ever again, not even to your sweetie or your wife or anyone. And Shindelli told us, I mean, this guy was almost in tears. He never talked about it for 30 years until right at this event, at this citizen hearing. Don't you think that's historical significance? 2013, April, May. So anyway, he said, he never talked about it again until Robert Salas contacted him and said, you have to come forward. And Shindelli broke his security oath and came forward. We don't know if it still applies 30 years later. I don't know, guys. But he said, I'm telling you, it happened. And he was told, never, he didn't even tell the missile technicians that came to start the missiles up again after they went offline, because they had told him not to talk about it to anyone. Look how compartmentalized this is. This is exactly what Dr. Hal Puthoff told us at the 2018 SSE URBA meeting. It's so stovepiped, you can't even talk to other people you should be talking to. So is it any wonder, as David Bowie said, is it any wonder that the left hand isn't talking to the right in our government, and this is what you end up with? Is Congress doesn't know, people in the Pentagon don't know, president doesn't know. Well, who knows? We're going to find out, I think. Now, Gary asked a few minutes ago, is this a diversion from what's going on in Russia, Ukraine? I don't think so, Gary. I just don't think so. I feel like this has been building up for a long time. We heard of Science Bob telling us this was coming. John Ramirez, former CIA missile analyst who's been on a lot of podcasts and talked about it, and talked about his openness about the CIA having classified orb programs and missile programs, UFO programs. He said that this was coming a couple of months ago. He said, watch this space. And here it is. So I think this is just, guys, reality is catching up. It's really happening. I want you just to pretend that it's really happening. Gary, I understand the cynicism. Believe me, it's 10 years ago from the citizen hearing. I always thought disclosure was just the next couple months away, ever since I got involved in remote viewing in 1996. You would encounter people and you'd always think, oh, it's just over there, and here we are, it's 2023. But I think these things could take longer. But I think, guys, let's act like it's really happening. And that matters because it means someone else is here on the planet with us. And we don't know exactly who they are. I don't know who they are. And there's materials. There's crashes. I haven't said everything I know about crashes because when I hear these stories, I'm told to change the details because it was just someone in the military or some engineer who saw this, and they just tell me, but they haven't told anyone else, and they're concerned. So I deliberately generalize about these stories when I tell them to you, because the people have said you need to be very general, so it doesn't get traced back to who these people are. Yes, Brooke, champagne. Let's celebrate, guys. Let's act like this is really happening. I do understand the Gary attitude, believe me, but this is really, that attitude I heard this morning. They were like, we're not putting up with this anymore, because they don't know if a whole branch of the government has broken off and is no longer accountable to Congress. And that's what they're concerned about. Congress makes laws in this country. They're the legislative. So legislative branch of the federal government. They have oversight. That's what the oversight committee does. And they have ways of hearing classified information. As we've heard over the past couple weeks, from Congress, is they're getting classified testimony from people, and David Grush has testified to them, and they're wondering what the F is going on. Do aerospace companies have this? Have they been concealing it? Have they been concealing it from their stockholders, which would be, as Ross Coulthart pointed out, their latest broadcast, need to know. He said that would violate SCE rules. Is there criminality involved here? This is what's really, has Congress heard evidence of criminality involved in this cover-up or truth embargo, whatever you want to call it? I mean, I don't know, but I want to hear the evidence. I wouldn't be surprised. Stephen Greer's been telling us this, but I need to see the evidence too, just like you do for myself. But that there's a high intimidation level. Now, I've spoken to a lot of former pilots. I spoke to John Callahan at Citizen Hearing. Remember, it was that flight in 1996, that Japanese airliner flight. What flight was that? JAL flight. Excuse me. It was in Black Swan Ghosts. JAL flight 1628. Now, he told us they had the radar data, and there was a meeting, a joint intelligence meeting, and the representatives of the CIA said, can we have the tapes at the end of the meeting? And he gave them the duplicates and kept the originals. And he said, no, this was on radar. They had, the CIA people told him. He told me this personally after one of the hearings panels. He said, They said to him, we've never had 30 minutes of UFO activity on radar tape. That's why we want your tape, John. Third down at the FAA. I mean, do you think these people make this up? They're responsible for running the FAA, those keeping the planes in the sky that you and I fly on. So this is something that has a lot of implications. And I think what's going on here is there's a couple theories. Zabel and Coolheart think maybe there's something really bad going on that the Congress is hearing about that we need to know about. I don't know what that would be, but something very negative attached to this in terms of the repression or the phenomena itself. We'll find out. But if this is being, and this is what was brought up in the press briefing for the Oversight Committee this morning. I mean, it was really startling. They said, well, if this is being covered up, what else is being covered up? And then is Congress able to do its job? And do we have a serious issue here? Now, I want to bring up something about the Maelstrom incidents because I have been reading this book by Preston Dennett, one of my favorite UFO researchers, Wondrous, one of his recent books, 25 UFO Encounters. And it's a really good book with lots of encounters and all sorts of stories of different types of creatures that people encounter. You know, are they ETs? Are they cryptids? We don't know, but really good stories. I love witness encounters like this because as someone with a sociology background, we like these first-person encounters where we can talk to witnesses. I mean, that's why I wrote Black Swan Ghosts, and it's getting a new cover soon. You saw that in the thumbnail of today's broadcast. But I really enjoy it. I've talked to Gary Sterling, former missile security guard at Minot in Velva, North Dakota. Remember those videos on my channel? He told us that they saw something bright. They were ordered to go out to this missile facility. The alarms were going off. They thought, what is it, a badger? Is it a rabbit tripping the alarms over and over? It was some super bright object that they couldn't even discern the shape. It was so bright, and they got burned from it. And then what were they told? It never happened. This wouldn't be good for your career. Don't you go talking to the media. This is exactly what Gary said. We've had David Noble Whitecrow on the channel. We're going to do another interview with him soon about all of this. And he's been on multiple times. And what did he tell us? On the USS Finch in the 60s, they were ordered to go on deck as a cigar-shaped object came over on the port side, I believe. Bluish plasma coming out, and it seemed to be crashing from those Operation Dominique atomic missile tests. They were testing these warheads before they put them in the missiles to make sure they work. And he also encountered the diver, the Master Chief, the guy that had been ordered to go down for this particular craft that somehow became destabilized from the nuclear blasts. And we talked to this guy, and the guy said, I'm going to write this book when I'm done with my career in the Navy. And David wanted to talk to him. Well, he saw the craft down there. He had a panic attack. He said it was huge. It was sort of mushy. You could put your hand through it. He could see beings walking around inside. You've heard these stories. So David has told us about, how many other witnesses are out there? And these guys are kind of taking a risk when they do this. I mean, are there going to be repercussions? They get pensions. They serve in the military, these pensions and benefits. I mean, people get threatened from reporting. As I mentioned, pilots. I've spoken to pilots for different airlines who've told me they have seen things and they don't report it because they don't want to be penalized. You get this psych evaluation. You could be grounded for a while. It's considered some sort of psychiatric deviation to see an object, It's not your fault that the creatures happen to be out to beans. We heard this at the press briefing this morning. I thought that was fascinating, right? They said they talked to service people. Isn't that right? Am I remembering this correctly? That said, we see these things on our practice missions, but if we talk about it, we're going to have to go through an 8-hour debriefing, and it could affect our career. So you have all this blackmail going on, and the witnesses aren't talking. Pilots are told, what are they told? I'm really sorry you saw it by the supervisor. UFO B reposted one of these interviews recently, a couple of days ago on Twitter, and it was one of these guys from a number of years ago saying his supervisor said, I'm sorry you had that sighting. Bad things happen to people who've had these sightings. And this has to end, folks. These objects are around, and who's ever in them knows us, but we don't know them, or at least you and I publicly don't know them. And this has to stop. We have to stop the negative effects, the ostracism and effects on your life of reporting this, because as all of you know who pay attention to my channel, there's a lot of witnesses out there. We have some of them right now in the chat who've seen cryptids, who've seen UFOs, who've seen ETs here and there. And people are reluctant to tell anyone because most people are afraid concerned about, being laughed at by family members and neighbors, right? Brooke, I agree. Kirkpatrick did a lot for us because he was so tight-lipped about this. And he said there's no evidence. And then here comes David Grush, says there's evidence. So it started a debate. And that's why everyone involved with this can play a role, even critics and debunkers, because we can see how shallow their arguments are sometimes. So let me just talk about Mel Hansen for a second in Preston Dennett's book. Here's another witness that Salas contacted, and he comes forward in 2015 from an event that happened in frickin' 1967, 50 years before. Is that 50 years before? He tells us this amazing story, guys. I will read a little bit from it because it's a new witness to the Maelstrom incidents. Don't you love new witnesses? It can corroborate what we heard from Salas and others. And he said the same thing what Robert Salas said. Sometime after midnight, the guard was sitting in my car, taking a break and having a cup of coffee, and not much was happening on the SATAF, Site Activation Task Force radio. It was a clear, dark night, and the guard and I stepped out of the car so he could have a smoke. It was a beautiful star-filled sky. However, it seemed really eerie. You could feel it in the air. It was unusually quiet. And he says suddenly the radio started to activate. There was unknown airborne activity. And then the whole thing just sort of lights up. There's a huge amount of activity. Now, here's what's really interesting about what he said. There have been critics of Robert Salas who've come forward, and they have said what happened that night was a power failure from the local utility company. And that's all that happened. And these people made it into a UFO event. Now, just like you, I'm open-minded to alternative explanations. I believe Robert Salas, but what's the counter explanation? I mean, it's worth always considering that, right? And I never was sure what was the power failure that night. Well, Hansen tells us here, and this is what's so freaking fascinating. He says they start talking about UFOs, and they're informed by Salas down below in the Missile Control Launch Facility. The missiles have gone into a no-go mode, one after the other. And the power does go out after they see the UFO hovering right over the launch facility at the gate, right? You've heard Salas talk about it. Not only did the power go down after the UFO was seen, the diesel generator goes down. Not only does the diesel generator go down, the battery backup goes down. So yeah, the power did go out, as whoever this person who mentioned, I think his name was Eric, he said he was there at the time. Yeah, the power went down, and so did the diesel generator after that, and then the battery backup. And Hansen says it was totally dark. All you heard was the radio cackling. All the missiles are down in this particular launch control facility. None of them would have launched. The power was out in ways, even with all these backup systems. So this is a great witness to come forward. Now, a couple things that backed up Shindelli. He said the radio traffic was out of control, and they were ordered to go back to the base in Minot. And when they went back out, and they were told not to talk about it, of course, and that we shouldn't discuss this. There were plainclothes people there. No uncertain terms, not to discuss this incident in any shape or form. And then They go back to the launch control facility. They said it's like an anthill of guys crawling over there trying to figure out what's going on. So I think this is successfully debunks this counterclaim that this was caused by the power shortage, because you have all these eyewitnesses who see these objects. First, Hansen says it just blocked out the sky. You could see stars were eerie. Haven't we heard about this before? UFOs, cryptids, paranormal encounters, eerie silence, feels strangely quiet, power goes off. Reminds me of being in the crop circles when you see your batteries on multiple devices go out. Anyway, I think this is really fascinating, and this is more evidence. We need to hear from the Mel Hansens in front of Congress, right? Obviously, there are a lot of witnesses here. As Steve Bassett used to say, for every of the 40 witnesses at the citizen hearing, there are 1,000 people behind them and 1,000 people behind them for each witness. It's a lot of witnesses, and I think this is really important, and I think we're getting off to possibly, I think this is disclosure when you have Congress asking questions, and they can ask David Grush next week under oath things that he couldn't talk about in the News Nation interview because he'll be under oath, and Congress can ask him all these questions about what is the nature of this situation with special access programs, crash retrievals, bodies, extraterrestrials. Did they get shipped to Wright-Patterson from Roswell? They could ask him anything. And Dave Fravor, we've heard from him before, and Ryan Graves. But, we wanted a congressional hearing, and I think this is a good start. And we're told that this is the beginning of many witnesses. So let's keep our fingers crossed here and see if this is one of those paradigm-defining moments where things do change. And eventually, everywhere, things change. The earth changes, sun changes. And these topics that seem so intransient, that they're not moving. Maybe, here's what I think about it. The longer you had this dam, the more water's building up behind the dam. And when the dam starts to break, you have more water going through. It just breaks faster and more severely. It's just the way reality works. And I'm looking forward to the day where we have an open discussion about this, as you are, from all these witnesses. I think it'll be a different country when these witnesses are not afraid to come forward and tell us what they've seen. There'll be no repercussions on their career. I heard from a Roswell witness once, and I called her, I forgot what I called her in Black Swan Ghost, but this was a woman I ran into at a coffee shop in Boulder, Colorado, and we just started talking. She just said, "Have you ever heard about Roswell?" And it just so happened, this is 1996, I had heard Jim Marrs. Remember Jim Marrs? He wrote Alien Agenda and Sci-Spies and books on the Kennedy assassination. Jim had spoken in the Boulder, Fort Collins area, and I had heard about Roswell. I hadn't heard about it before, and he told us. And well, Joe said that her dad called all 4 daughters into his hospital room 2 weeks before he died and told them that, and he was an Air Force pilot that had been retained after World War II to fly nuclear. He was nuclear qualified to fly, I think it was B-27s, whatever they were flying at the time. And he was there in 47, and he told them whatever it was really serious enough for them to have guards in the plane to keep the pilots from looking inside the crates. So that is no weather balloon, right? And he said to Joe and others, his other daughters, that guard never left those crates except to briefly use the bathroom and came back. He slept next to the crates. And he told this woman went to Roswell UFO conference and told the same thing to Don Schmitt, because I asked Don Schmitt, the researcher with Jim, Carey, who wrote those books, Witness to Roswell, about the kids that had been threatened by the army down there, and a couple books about Roswell. The Real Area 51 about Wright Patterson. I think it's been given another name. And he remembered her. She had come down there and told the same story. He said, yes, we never had contact with her, as did I. But so you have these deathbed confessions, but we should be hearing about this before. Whatever it was, this guy said, I was afraid to tell you because I didn't want harm to come to our family. So this is what we're living under, is a type of intimidation. Who is doing it and why? This is what we need to find out, because this involves a lot of technology, a lot of science. It involves reality. And we don't want to be, ostriches with our heads in the sand. That's like going back to the Middle Ages, believing in all sorts of Aristotelian philosophical ideas about reality when it's considerably more complex and interesting than philosophy. And we're sort of living in that bubble right now. And I feel like a lot of people are still asleep about it, the media. But it involves these credible people who've served their country and so forth. So you know what I'm saying about this. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say tonight. Let's look at a couple questions. I think this will be interesting, and I'm encouraged by the feeling, and let's hope this momentum continues, and we get more witnesses coming forward. People are getting interested in this. I have people asking me, people I know who are in coffee shops I work in around town, who've just come up to me, other academics, and they say, Simeon, is this for real, this UFO stuff? I'm hearing it on Fox News. What's going on? What do you think's going on? I say, I tell them. And they go, really? How's it possible? Ever since the national security state was established, during World War II, it never came apart after World War II. That's what we're dealing with here, and things got compartmentalized. So there's a whole nother offshoot of our society that got compartmentalized. I mean, even the Clintons wanted to have this massive declassification of documents that didn't need to be declassified. You can see that things go in the direction of classification. It's very hard to declassify them. And let me tell you one other thing before we just go to questions. Merrell Cook. When I talked to him, he said, I'm interested in this, and I've talked to my other representatives. I think it's an aircraft safety issue. Well, he shows up at the Open Minds International UFO Congress in outside of Scottsdale at Fountain Hills on the reservation there in Arizona, where I've been to a couple conferences there. And this is what he says. This should give you pause. He had called his other representatives in Utah and in Congress that he knew. And he said, guys, do you know about the UFO issue and some of the why it matters? And they said, I couldn't believe this. Merrell said to the Opening Minds UFO Congress, they said, Merrell, we would love to do something about this, but we get our re-election money from the special access programs. And if we told the truth, we wouldn't be re-elected. This is exactly what Merrell Cook said to the Opening Minds UFO Congress in 2016. I wasn't there, but I saw it on video later. The same Merrell Cook I talked to at the citizen hearing, he had lost a lot of weight by then and looked in a lot better shape. His wife was passing away at the time that he attended the citizen hearing, and he told us he was under a lot of stress from a neurodegenerative disease. And he looked a lot better by 2016. And this is what he said. They told him we can't talk about it, Merrell, because we get our re-election money from special access programs. And we're told that these special access programs spend more money on covering their tracks and creating cutout operations to disguise what they're doing. And disinformation, right? We've heard this from Richard Doty, who I interviewed, a number of years at the UFO MegaCon in Laughlin. I believe it was 2019. They have so much money to spend on covering their tracks more than on the project itself, and this is where it's going. So they're well endowed, and they can keep the status quo going for a while, but nobody can keep that going forever. The KGB couldn't manage it in the Soviet Union. it doesn't look like Putin's going to be able to hold on to power in Russia as it is right now forever. You can see that situation crumbling right now. It's just because it's the nature of power. And I can say this as someone who's in sociology. I mean, powerful interests compete against each other. They're not cooperating. And they all want to get each other's resources. They sort of take each other out after a while. So this is that's the final thing I want to tell you. This is what Merrell Cook had said, and this is why it's so challenging. We've been inundated by misinformation, disinformation. It's not just hiding the truth, as Rick Doty told us. They spent a lot of money on journalists in the New Mexico area. They just had cash they could give them to rewrite stories and to cover up what was going on at the Air Force Base and any UFO sightings and whatever they wanted them to do. They had a lot of journalists on the payroll. And let me tell you one other little story before we go tonight. We had someone on our crop circle tour in 1997, Diana. And she told us that we asked, what do you do, Diana? She says, well, I work in the media department at CIA in Langley. Well, we asked her, well, what does the media department do? She goes, well, I have a Rolodex of 400 journalists, and we can send them stories to run. We talked to them. I said, well, what do you mean? Do you have them rewrite stories they're about to publish, not to give away national security secrets, which I think we could understand? Or do you just invent stories, fictional stories, and send it to them? She said, both. Matter of factly. Diana's passed on now. But both. They just write stories and send it. And these journalists are on the take. And this is why we don't know about this, is because they feel as if they don't cooperate with the federal government, they won't get access to the good stories. They won't be in front of the line when good stories come out. So the whole thing becomes corrupted, right? And they are not telling us the truth. And I fear this is what's happened to the major newspapers, is they're on the payroll. But again, it changes. One day it changes. Is it going to be next week or next month or next year? I don't know exactly when. But one day they see the light and different people come to power. And I know from being in academia, people are hungry. Younger professionals and academics are hungry for recognition. And they often feel like they can get this from going into new topics and delving deeper. And this is why we get discoveries in cosmology and physics and other places. As they say, look, I don't want to do what the older folks did here in the department who got their degrees 30 years before me. I want to do something new. And I'm sort of one of those people. I didn't want to do the same old thing in sociology. So I got in, fractals and chaos theory and this hidden events. Hidden events are events that happen, but people aren't talking about. UFOs are hidden events. In any case, guys, thanks very much for listening tonight. Now, any questions here? I just say keep your mind open and you could call your senators or congresspeople. I've called them recently. I've called some senators and so forth in my district in Colorado. And get involved. Ask your media why they're not. What are they afraid of talking about? They're going to have to cover it after next Wednesday. Maybe they could ignore the citizen hearing. Boy, did they ignore that with all those fantastic witnesses that we just talked about a few of. There was one witness there, by the way. It was very interesting. It was Dr. Shindelli, and he showed us these. That's Don Schmidt and Pete Robbins, and is it Tom Carey, Schmidt's co-author on Roswell? They were there. It was fun meeting all these researchers. But Dr. Shindelli showed us these figures, and he said. He said that he's a Chinese UFO researcher. He told us in China you have to get a license from the government to study UFOs. It's considered real, but you have to get some qualification. And he said these ancient figures they've dug up in China, they thought were extraterrestrials. Now, I think those of us who look at this, could be a lot of things, but they said maybe these are ETs. So one of the things we saw at the citizen hearing. But the citizen hearing was a good event, but it didn't get the coverage it should, because professionals generally want to just toe the line. In a lot of cases, they don't want to jeopardize their careers by really taking risks, so they're playing it safe. But again, I feel the longer that goes on, it's like the rubber band effect. I mean, the rubber band's pulling back. That's what I'm saying is happening. I'd say this to Gary, and Gary, again, thanks for showing up tonight, and thanks for your show. I enjoy listening to your show sometimes too, and being on your show. The rubber band is still getting pulled back, even if it doesn't look like things, and it's got more energy to snap forward now, because the evidence starts building up. And even Hal Puthoff has told us this, he told us this at SSE IRVA 2018. There's too much sensor data now, as we've heard from Ryan Graves and others, who's going to testify on Wednesday. There's too much sensor data to ignore. Satellites have higher resolution. You just cannot ignore this after a while. And we see these objects around, and I think we all would like to know whose objects are these? Is anyone inside? I mean, what the devil is going on here? Who's here with us? Where are they from? What are they doing? We're all curious. Can we talk to them? As I got asked in Paramus, New Jersey the other day, and I'm going to put this on YouTube. I'm just working on this video from Paramus, New Jersey in, I think it was March, the Rotary Club. And someone said, well, Dr. Hine, how come they're not landing yet? Where aren't they going to land, Well, sometimes they do. And sometimes it gets covered up and people aren't sure what they saw. I don't know. There's a lot of reasons. Or maybe they don't want to scare us too much. Maybe their frequency would shred us like a fan. Maybe there could be a number of reasons. Maybe they don't think like we do. I'm going to look for questions now. Thanks. The snap is going to sting. Yes, it's inevitable. Just look in history. History shows us this happens and things change quite rapidly. Yeah, I agree, Brooke. They're playing it cool until they feel like we want to get on the bandwagon too. As I was told by Harry at the PR company, when I lived in Manhattan for a while, on and off, for a decade. And I grew up there as a kid on the Upper West Side. That's where I was born. So it felt like being at home. In any case. But this is what Harry told me. Simeon, if New York Times is going to run it, it's got to be a New York story. It's got to be a New York story. Or the paper, and even New York, they won't run it. And then he called me in 2017, he wrote. New York Times article, 2017. Right? He said, you were right, Simeon. The New York Times. Remember the article by Leslie Kane and Blumenthal and Helene Cooper that started all of this due to the efforts of people who had been in ATIP, OSAP, all that, the Tom DeLonge group. He said, it's finally a New York story, Now do you want to come back? So I don't know what it's going to take, but guys, we're all going to see together. Right. So I worked in Japan teaching RV. I went there 5 times starting in 2005. And they had a UFO museum there that I had been told they actually had parts of UFO, and the U.S. had told them take the pieces away and replace it with satellites or something. This is what I'm told. I didn't go see it, but my students in the RV class, short order cook, said there's a UFO museum there. And but there was actually crash material there, but they had to take it away. Okay. So anyway, folks, I would just, every day could be really interesting here. And why do we want this? We want this because we want the best for our society, for our country, for the world, which I believe involves openness. It's what the United States stands for: transparency, openness, inclusiveness, a rules-based society that doesn't favor powerful people more than other people just because they have the power. That there's accountability and there's checks and balances. That's my view of the U.S. And I think we have to straighten this out. That's the minimum reason we should straighten this out. Well, what do remote viewers need to focus on right now? Whatever targets you find interesting. You could have friends put them in folders. We're working on targets like this in our viewing group that meets on Sunday, every other Sunday night. Our advanced RV group, which Jules is a part of. And that's part of the reason we do it. The information can come across in different ways. Now, all of you know that witnesses can experience this and they have missing time afterwards. Remember Bud Hopkins? I remember a presentation at the UFO Congress in Laughlin from Bud Hopkins and Carol Ramey. about 20 years ago or so, and it was based on their book, Sight Unseen. And this is what was going on. Bud Hopkins, the UFO abduction researcher, told us that he had a lot of people come to him and say, look, we took a picture of our family on the beach, and when we look at the photo, it's empty. And then when you probe a little bit, they start to remember that something came down, took their family up, and they were left standing there, and the beach was empty. And the family's replaced later. I mean, that's one explanation for what's going on. And they don't remember it. So here's one possibility, folks, that could be going on here. It's not just disclosure. And remote viewers like Jules and others would know about this. You actually don't totally know what's going on because your conscious and unconscious minds are so good at deleting and filtering out things that don't fit what you believe to be true. And the evidence shows, and you've heard me say this before, you're only perceiving a tiny fraction of reality. That book, The User Illusion, which Ingo Swann talked about at the Austin IRVA conference in 2002, I had read that actually before Ingo mentioned it. Just it came across my radar. He said it was his favorite book, and it said we're only conscious of like 1,000% of, literally 1,000th of a percent what's around us in the room right now with our physical senses. So it's quite possible that we've all had experiences with this phenomena, and we're not remembering it, or it's getting deleted. I'm just mentioning this as a possibility. So it could be that the reason we can't just have this all happen in a week is we might not be able to take it either. Even those of us here right now, it might be too much for you to handle because it's going to bring back memories, childhood things. You've had contact with this phenomenon. I've talked to people. I mean, you remember I talked to my wrestling coach from high school, Vinny. It's on the YouTube channel. In Westchester, Edgemont High School, the wrestling coach. I wasn't on the wrestling team, but he was there when I was in high school. And they had seen a black triangle over Mamaroneck High School a few miles away, the wrestling team. And classmates of mine had seen this black triangle that shot off when some jets came out from the direction of Connecticut. And it went off in the direction of Jersey. Vinny said, like the Starship Enterprise, in warp speed. They all saw this. They called the police. There was a blackout over the whole town shortly thereafter. And my colleagues, my friends in high school, kids I knew, never talked about it. I only learned about it a few years ago. That's how much about the cover-up is not just from the government. That's what I want to say here. It's from us, too, because our psyche doesn't want to deal with it. And these kids said it was the scariest thing they'd ever seen because it's different. Remember the Hudson Valley UFO incidents? It started before the 80s. We think of it as something in the 80s. I had already gone to college by then, and I grew up near the Hudson. But it looks like Vinny and the wrestling team saw it in the late 70s, 78, 77, 78. Black triangles hovering over the high school of the gym. So I always like to say there's a couple levels of disclosure. There's the official level, but there's within our consciousness. And to go back to your question, Short Order Cook, this is why we study RV, to get to know the other aspects of your awareness and consciousness that have access to more information than your conscious mind, right? So, yeah, Inouye and Stevens, I don't know. Were they killed for their curiosity? I guess it could happen. But they're real heroes, weren't they? Remember Inouye with that speech? There's a shadow army and a shadow navy and a shadow air force. Now, at Stephen Greer's event a couple weekends ago in D.C. at the National, he gave this weekend event and then gave a National Press Club event, right? This is what I really enjoyed about that. There was a law professional who worked in New Jersey, a guy that went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut like I did and graduated in law and is now a practicing lawyer for, I believe, one of the state government in New Mexico or something like that. And he said he was an intern in Congress and had heard about the UFO issue and went into Inouye's office one day and asked him. He said, "Is this all true?" And Inouye said yes. He had heard this speech about the Shadow Army and the Shadow Navy. And I think this is the story, correct me if I'm wrong, that this law intern at the time was working for a senator, and saw Daniel Inouye and knocked on the door and went in and said, Senator Inouye, is this all true? And Inouye told him the truth, and he got interested in this, and that's why he works with Stephen Greer's group. He put up quite a good argument that they're going to get to the bottom of this from a legal perspective because it's illegal to conceal this information, as we heard this morning again at Congress from the Congress people in the Oversight Committee. It's not legal to withhold information from Congress. And this guy said we're going to be getting to the bottom of this using RICO law, which basically the argument being that criminal organizations can't use their proceeds to cover up what they're doing. That's why the government has the right to take their money, because it wasn't legally gotten and you can't use it. So they're going to use RICO to say that the laws that were passed by special access programs to keep people from talking are not legal either, and that people don't have to observe their NDAs. That's the angle they're taking on this. So, yes. So again, going back to Gary's question, and again, Gary is a great radio podcast. He's really great about these shows. His great witnesses. He's had over 1,000 Bigfoot witnesses. I mean, tremendous number. And so this is sort of what I want to talk about tonight. We've gone over an hour here. Thanks for listening to Create. Yes, Bob. You're welcome. Short order. Hey, Mick, how's it going from Australia? Yeah, people are busy, but people will follow what the media does, and they will follow eventually what the gist of it is, because it's their money going into the tax system that pays for this. That's why they'll be interested in it eventually, and it's up to the rest of us that spend time investigating this to explain to people that you meet, just neighbors and friends, why this matters. So, yes, a reality that can fit you. Absolutely. Vatir says her half-sister talked about a triangular-shaped craft her and her mom saw walking in school in Connecticut, just like Gary Nolan. Didn't Gary tell us that he grew up in Connecticut? Paper route story. Saw this huge craft overhead on his. I had a paper route when I grew up, and Gary did too, and that's how he got interested. Yeah, so people have had these sightings. In Black Swan Ghosts, I have a woman who had this encounter in the Bronx, seeing one of these huge triangles from the I forget the name of that hill there in the Upper Bronx, and she said people were looking out the window. And then I read someone else saying the same sort of thing, another witness, the Bronx, seeing it right there in the Bronx. So, aported objects from 11 and altered dimensions. Yeah, I mean, okay, so this is something, and I've had videos about this recently. Variable speed of light, Einstein's variable speed of light, how that leads to permittivity changes. Bob Grenier, Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, has great YouTube videos, often several a week, where he covers this. And he recently covered, just a couple days ago, a NASA paper from 1979 where they talk about UFO propulsion systems. They talk about coherent matter, plasmas, and coherent matter waves, something I've talked about and something that they mentioned, and dark matter monsters that I know you all have a copy of, or going to want to have a copy of. Coherent matter wave technology. And here it is in the 1979 paper talking about space-time metric engineering, which we've heard of from Hal and other people, right? And that type of space-time malleability can create all sorts of interesting space-time distortions. Hal talked about UFOs blue shifting because their speed of light is a little faster than ours. Variable speed of light. Now, Einstein talked about variable speed of light in 1907 and 1911. It wasn't something he developed much, but he proposed it. And if you have variable permittivity, the electrical constant in free space and in objects is normally set to 1, very close to 1. If it oscillates, things look what? Blurry. Oscillating permittivity leads to blurry photos. Even the objects will not. We've heard Russian researchers in cold fusion Leonard talk about this. Jacques Paranov and others. They said their photos of their cold fusion reactors always came out blurry. Hello. Okay. So thanks, 11, for that question. Yes, it can create all sorts of effects that seem paranormal. That's my view, at least. So in any case, folks, thanks very much for listening tonight. I've enjoyed this. I know we all have a lot of other things to do, but I mean, this is fun. Let's stay in touch. I've enjoyed all your questions tonight. Cheers, Brooke. Thanks, Jules, and everyone who's... oh, thanks, yes. darkmattermonsters.com. And if you go to my blog, newcrystalmind.com, I'm happy to sign a copy for you. Black Swan Ghost is getting a new cover from the same artist, my friend from high school, Mark Tuckman. We went to the alternative school together. He did Dark Matter Monsters. He's also doing this new cover for Black Swan Ghost, and you can get signed copies from newcrystalmind.com. And in any case, well, thanks a lot, folks, and we will see you around the universe. Let's see if we can have some outro movie. By the way, that music at the beginning was Roswell, the song Roswell by myself and Dava Nasser. She did the mixing on it, did the electric guitar. So let's see if we can get another theme on the way out. Thanks again, folks, and we'll talk soon. Let's see. Hey. I guess. Okay, thanks, folks. We will see you soon.